For there is symbolic as well as actual beauty in the migration of the birds and the ebb and flow of tides and the folded bud ready for the spring. There is something infinitely healing in the repeated refrains of nature, the assurance that dawn comes after night and spring after winter. Mankind has gone very far into an artificial world of its own creation. He has sought to insulate himself in his cities of steel and concrete away from the realities of earth, water, the growing seed, and intoxicated with the self of his own power, he seems to be going further and further into experiments towards the destruction of himself and of his world.
Prior to the 1960s, few Americans paid attention to the potential dangers of industrial and agricultural chemicals such as DDT. In 1962, author Rachel Carson led the fight against DDT by publishing her most famous book, Silent Spring. She vividly painted a world where birds could no longer survive, a world that could become a reality, and entered a debate about whether or not we should be meddling with nature. Her legislative legacy was the Clean Air Act, 1963, the Water Quality Act, 1965, the National Environmental Policy Act, 1969, the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, 1970, and the outlaw of DDT in 1972. It's the 1950s. World War II recently ended and nuclear weapons are starting to be used. DDT is being used on a large scale, destroying the environment and causing extreme weather conditions.
Around 40 countries have been trying to use chemicals to eradicate pests, but the results haven't been satisfactory due to growing insect resistance. Failure to control the vector mosquito caused an outbreak of yellow fever in Trinidad in 1954, and mosquitoes harbored and spread the malaria parasite in Greece, Nigeria, and Liberia. The true irony is how much money man has spent on controlling nature and molding it to his own model, and yet to have failed so desperately. The balance of nature is always changing and can never be controlled, and nature itself is the true answer to an effective control of insects. Man longs to create an artificial world by eradicating all pests, but instead is destroying itself and its environment. Rachel Carson was born in 1907, growing up on a farm in rural Pennsylvania where her love of nature began. At 13 years old, Carson started her professional writing career, having her essays bought for a little over $3 by St. Nicholas, a newspaper manager. In college, Carson was mentored by Mary Scott Skinker, a biology professor at PCW, who encouraged her as she majored in biology and helped her land a job at the U.S. Bureau of Fisheries after college. The Bureau was put in place to conserve the environment, but ended up destroying it even more. They were focused on eradicating starfish and oyster farming operations, doing so by spreading a chemical poison into bodies of water. While working with the Bureau, Carson wrote many DDT press releases, which inspired her to write Silent Spring.
Throughout the next 3 decades, 1.35 billion pounds of DDT were being used by the U.S. alone. DDT was being indiscriminately spread by airplanes. Furthermore, higher concentrations of DDT than recommended were used because the aerial sprayers were paid by the gallon, not the acre. Environmentalists like Carson claimed that spraying was perpetuating the problem it seemed to correct. DDT was a commonly used chemical found in soaps, powders, lawnmower sprayers, airplane sprayers, aerosol bombs, liquid sprays, and emulsions. Scientists didn't know much about DDT, even though they had been spraying it for years, until the Patuxent River experiment, which took place in Prince George's County, Maryland. They wanted to know what other effects DDT may have on widespread areas, how it would affect insects and animals that fed majoritively on insects, and the risks of overused amounts. In 1962, around the time that Carson published Silent Spring, the public believed that science was God and had been looking up to chemists who claimed that it was better living through chemistry. Silent Spring exposed the scientists who had denied Carson's evidence to the unaware public.
Miss Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, are gross distortions of the actual facts, completely unsupported by scientific experimental evidence.
The confused public's cries forced the Senate to form a committee to investigate pesticide use. This committee found all of the chemical secrets and a layer of chemicals draped upon the world. They learned that, for the first time in history, every human was being exposed to deadly chemicals. Later, the U.S. realized the true dangers of DDT. Infant mortality rates and cancer rates had been on the rise due to the continuous presence of DDT. DDT was completely underestimated and had no parallels to anything else in medical history, so the long-term consequences were unknown. Rachel Carson said that the danger of cancer hazard from the contaminated drinking water would grow considerably in the foreseeable future, which scared many American civilians. A grim specter has crept in upon us almost unnoticed. Everywhere is a shadow of death. The public demanded that science and the government be held responsible, claiming, as Jean Roseanne said, the obligation to endure gives us the right to know. Silent Spring was on the New York Times bestseller list for 31 weeks after its publication. JFK publicly gave his support to Carson, and as a direct result of Silent Spring, set up a special panel of his Science Advisory Committee to study the problem of pesticides.
In 1962, Rachel Carson's Silent Spring sparked a social revolution and a national debate on the use of chemicals and the responsibility of science. Scientists were exposed for their deadly chemicals, especially DDT. The environment is humans' responsibility to take care of because life is impossible without it. Although DDT has been banned since 1972, many acts have been passed and the environment still needs help. Carson changed the way that humans viewed their world. Now humans need to act on those findings. Carson believed in a world where everything lived in harmony and humans should aim to make that a reality.